The night sky over the desert was quiet. The stars shone like silver dust scattered over dark velvet. Nothing moved except the soft wind, whispering through the dry sand. Then suddenly the silence broke. A bright streak of light tore across the heavens, growing larger and brighter until the desert turned white with its glow. People in the nearby town looked up in shock. Some thought it was a meteor. Others whispered that it was a falling satellite. But one man, a mechanic named Ethan Cross, knew something was different. The light was too controlled, the descent too uneven, like a wounded bird trying to land. Ethan stood outside his workshop, wiping grease from his hands. His small house sat alone near the edge of the dunes, surrounded by broken vehicles and spare parts. He was used to quiet nights, used to fixing other people's machines, but tonight something inside him stirred, a feeling that something extraordinary was happening. He jumped into his old Jeep, its engine coughing to life, and drove toward the glowing horizon. The light was still falling, slower now, leaving trails of burning fragments behind. Then, with a thunderous impact, it struck the desert floor miles away. A shockwave rippled through the air, shaking Ethan's mirrors. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. When he reached the crash site, the air smelled of ozone and heat. The sand was turned to glass in a wide circle, and in the center lay a strange silver object half buried in smoke. It wasn't like anything human-made. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, alive with faint blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Ethan stepped closer, his boots crunching over the cooling sand. "What are you?" he whispered. Then he saw it, a figure lying near the wreckage. Small, delicate, almost human in shape. The figure moved weakly, trying to rise but falling again. Ethan's instincts overpowered his fear. He ran forward, crouched beside the being, and gasped. It was a woman, or something like one. Her skin had a pale, silvery tone that reflected the moonlight. Her eyes, when they opened, glowed faintly blue, like stars trapped in glass. She was hurt, her arm bleeding with a strange luminous liquid that shimmered as it touched the sand. Hey, it's okay," Ethan said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The being looked at him with confusion, breathing unevenly. Her voice, when she tried to speak, was soft and melodic, but the words made no sense. Ethan frowned, realizing she was speaking another language, one no human had ever heard. Still, her tone wasn't hostile. It was frightened, lost. Ethan gently took out his flashlight and pointed it away from her face. "You're hurt," he said, gesturing toward her wounds. "Let me help you." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to read his thoughts. Then, with great effort, she nodded once. He pulled off his jacket and carefully wrapped it around her arm. The glowing liquid dimmed slightly, slowing its strange flow. "What happened to you?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. "You fell from the stars, didn't you?" The ship behind them gave a low hum, then went silent. The blue lights faded, and the desert became still again. Ethan knew others would come soon. Scientists, soldiers, or maybe something worse. If they found her, she wouldn't be safe. He looked at the faint light of her eyes again. They weren't just alien. They were filled with pain, but also trust. Somehow she knew he wasn't her enemy. Ethan sighed. "All right, Stargirl," he murmured. "Let's get you out of here." He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was. Her touch was cool, almost electric, sending a tingling sensation up his arms. She winced but didn't resist. Carrying her to his Jeep, Ethan placed her in the back seat and covered her with a blanket. "Hang on," he said, starting the engine. "We're going home." The drive back was long and tense. The being, whoever she was, drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she whispered words in her strange language. Sometimes she stared at the stars through the window, her eyes reflecting quiet sadness. Ethan spoke softly to her, even though she couldn't understand. "You're safe now. I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you're not alone." When they reached his workshop, he carried her inside and laid her gently on his workbench. The metallic smell of oil filled the air. He found his first aid kit and did his best to clean her wounds, though he wasn't sure if human medicine would work on her. To his surprise, her body began to heal on its own, slowly sealing the glowing cuts, leaving behind faint silver lines. She opened her eyes again, more alert now. Her gaze wandered across the cluttered room, the tools, the old posters, the shelves of spare parts. When her eyes met Ethan's, something changed. Her fear softened, replaced by curiosity. "My name's Ethan," he said, pointing at himself. "Ethan," She blinked, then pointed weakly at her own chest. Lyra, she said, her voice gentle but clear. Ethan smiled in amazement. Lyra, that's a star name. She tilted her head slightly as if understanding the word star and smiled faintly. That small, uncertain smile filled the room with warmth. Ethan brought her some water. She took the cup hesitantly, studying it like it was a strange object, then sipped carefully. The moment she tasted it, her eyes widened, as if water itself was something rare or sacred where she came from. Outside, the desert wind howled, brushing sand against the metal walls. Ethan knew he couldn't tell anyone about her. If the authorities found out, she'd be taken away for experiments. He couldn't let that happen. She wasn't a specimen. She was someone who had suffered. As the night deepened, Ethan sat in his chair, watching over her. He tried to make sense of everything: the ship, her wounds, the strange light in her blood. Nothing fit the world he knew, and yet he felt no fear, just wonder. Lyra, lying on the table, watched him too. Her mind, though dizzy from the crash, tried to read the strange signals of this human's behavior. His eyes were soft. His voice carried no command, no threat, only concern. In all her travels across distant worlds, she had never seen eyes like his. There was something wild and kind about them, something real. She didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. He was helping her. A stranger, a creature from a less advanced world, was showing her the thing her people had long forgotten: compassion. Before she closed her eyes to rest, Lyra whispered something in her language, a quiet phrase filled with gratitude. Ethan didn't understand, but he smiled anyway. "You're welcome," he said softly. "Get some rest, Star Girl." Hours passed. The desert night was peaceful again. Ethan drifted to sleep in his chair, while the silver figure on his table breathed slowly, her body glowing faintly like a fallen star learning to heal. Far above the earth, among the distant constellations, the wreck of her ship sent a final pulse, a weak signal that would not go unnoticed. Somewhere out there in the dark reaches of space, others had heard it, and they were coming. But for now, in a small workshop under a quiet sky, a human and an alien shared the same air, the same silence, and the first fragile thread of understanding between two worlds. Lyra dreamed of her home among the stars, and of a pair of kind human eyes watching over her, full of reckless hope. Morning light filtered through the dusty windows of Ethan's workshop. The sound of wind outside was soft and calm, carrying the smell of hot sand and rusted metal. Inside, everything was still except for the faint hum coming from the corner, where Lyra rested under a blanket, her pale skin glowing softly like moonlight trapped in human space. Ethan rubbed his eyes, still half asleep in his chair. The night had been long. He had watched over her, checking her strange wounds, making sure she was breathing. He still couldn't believe what he had seen. An alien. A real living being from the stars, lying in his old workshop wrapped in one of his jackets. He stood up quietly, stretching his sore arms, and looked around. Tools, wires, and machines covered the workbenches. His jeep stood in one corner, half disassembled, waiting for repair. But now all his focus was on the figure resting in the light. Lyra moved slowly, her eyes opening. For a moment, confusion filled her face, but then she saw Ethan, standing nearby holding a mug of water. Her expression softened. "You're awake," he said gently. "Good morning." She blinked as if trying to understand the words. Her lips moved slowly. "Good morning." Ethan's eyes widened. You can talk?" Lyra frowned, searching for the right words. "Learn him fast," she said in a soft, careful tone. Her voice was calm, melodic, like a song made of light. Ethan smiled in disbelief. "You learn fast, all right." She sat up, her movements graceful but weak. Her silver hair shimmered in the sunlight. The wound on her arm had nearly closed, leaving only a faint mark like a scar made of light. She touched it thoughtfully, then looked around the room. "Where? This?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Ethan pointed to the walls. "My workshop, Earth, desert." He hesitated, unsure if she would understand. "Earth," she repeated quietly. The word rolled off her tongue like something sacred. She looked out the window at the golden sand and blue sky. "Beautiful," she whispered. Ethan chuckled. "Beautiful, yeah, when it's not burning hot." He offered her some bread and fruit from a small plate. Lyra studied it carefully, then took a small bite. Her eyes lit up. "Sweet," she said with a faint smile. Welcome to Earth breakfast, Ethan replied, amused. Not as fancy as space food, I bet. Lyra tilted her head. Space food? She repeated. Cold, no taste, this better. Her English was broken, but she was learning fast. Every word she spoke made Ethan more curious. He wanted to know everything. Where she came from, how she traveled, why she crashed. He sat beside her, trying to sound gentle. Lyra, he began, your ship. It crashed. Why, were you attacked? She looked down, her eyes dimming. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke softly, her accent strange but clear enough. My world, fighting. Too much fighting. I run away. Ship hurt, no fuel. Fall here. Ethan's heart ached. She wasn't a soldier, she was a refugee. I'm sorry, he said. You didn't deserve that. Lyra looked at him, confusion in her eyes. Deserve? He sighed. It means it's not fair. You shouldn't have to suffer. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Use kind eyes, she said quietly. Not like others. Ethan blinked, surprised by her words. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone who had crossed the stars. Thanks, he said with a small smile. You're not too bad yourself. Lyra tilted her head again, curious. Not too bad, she repeated, clearly not understanding the phrase, but smiling anyway. For the next few hours, they worked together silently. Ethan showed her how his tools worked. She touched everything with fascination. The screwdriver, the oil can, the spark plugs. When she placed her hands on a broken radio, it suddenly came to life, humming with perfect clarity. Ethan stared in awe. How did you do that? Lyra smiled faintly. Feel energy, she said, tapping the side of her head. Everything has sound. I fix sound, he shook his head in wonder. You're incredible. She looked puzzled again. Incredible? Ethan laughed. It means amazing. She nodded, her face brightening. Amazing, she repeated proudly. That afternoon, they sat outside the workshop, watching the desert stretch endlessly. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in orange and purple colors. Lyra's eyes reflected the light beautifully, like mirrors of the sunset. Why you help me? She asked suddenly. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the question. Why wouldn't I? Humans. Afraid, she said softly. Other worlds say, humans fight, destroy, take. Ethan's smile faded a little. Yeah, he admitted. Sometimes we do. We're not perfect, but we're not all bad either. She watched him silently, trying to understand the human heart through his words. You different, she said after a while. You help without ask. You give without take. Ethan looked away toward the horizon. Maybe that's what makes us human, he said. We do crazy things for people we barely know. Lyra tilted her head again, her voice almost a whisper. Crazy, oh, but kind. They sat in silence for a while, the cool desert wind brushing past them. Ethan couldn't stop glancing at her. This being from the stars, sitting beside him like a fragile miracle. And Lyra, for the first time since her crash, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. That night, Ethan worked on repairing her ship. Lyra helped, showing him where certain panels fit and how to handle the strange metal. The language barrier didn't matter much. They communicated through gestures, nods, and the occasional smile. When Ethan accidentally cut his finger on a sharp edge, Lyra immediately reached out, touching his hand. A soft glow spread from her fingertips and the cut closed within seconds. He stared in disbelief. You healed me, she looked at him calmly. Small pain. Easy to fix, Ethan laughed lightly. Wish I had that power when I burn myself cooking. Lyra blinked. Cook? Food? He nodded. Yeah, want to try tomorrow? She smiled shyly. Yes. For hours they worked together under the stars. The damaged ship slowly began to take shape again, though many parts were still beyond repair. Lyra explained in broken words that she needed a special core, a power source that didn't exist on Earth. Without it, she couldn't go home. Ethan thought about it for a long time. Then maybe, he said finally, you can stay for a while. Lyra looked at him unsure. Stay here? He nodded. Until we figure out how to fix your ship. You'll be safe here. Her expression softened. Safe, she repeated as if testing the meaning. Then she smiled. Yes, safe. Days passed. Lyra learned fast. She studied Earth's things, the radio, books, the old TV Ethan fixed for her. She loved music most of all. When Ethan played an old song from his dusty speakers, her eyes filled with light. "Beautiful," she whispered every time. Ethan watched her with quiet amazement. The more he knew her, the more he realized how human she was, even if her heart beat to a different rhythm. She laughed softly when he told stories about Earth's strange inventions. She frowned when he mentioned wars or pollution. She didn't understand cruelty. To her, kindness was the strongest force in the universe. But behind her calm smile, Ethan could sense something deeper, a sadness she tried to hide. Sometimes she would stare at the night sky for hours, whispering words in her language. When he asked what she was saying, she would only smile and say, "Talking to stars." He never pushed her. He just sat beside her, watching the same sky, wondering how many secrets it held. One night, as they worked under the glow of the half-repaired ship, Lyra stopped suddenly. Her hand trembled as she touched the metal surface. The blue light running along the ship's edge flickered strangely. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. Lyra's face grew pale. "Signal," she said softly. "They'd find me!" Ethan frowned. "Who?" She looked at him with eyes full of fear. "My people." The hum of the ship grew louder for a moment, then faded again. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what it meant, but he could see the worry on her face. He placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "Hey, whatever's coming, we'll handle it together." Lyra looked at his hand, then at his face. There it was again, that reckless courage she had never seen before. The kind that made her believe even when the odds were impossible. She whispered softly, "Human heart." "Strange but strong," Ethan smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." And as the wind carried the quiet hum of the stars, two beings, one human, one not, stood together under the same sky, unaware that their meeting would soon change not only their lives but perhaps the fate of both their worlds. The nights in the desert had become peaceful for Ethan and Lyra. Days were spent repairing the strange ship, and nights were filled with quiet talks, music, and stargazing. The human and the alien had built something rare, trust. But peace, as always, never lasts forever. It began one evening, when the air outside turned heavy and silent. The stars above were bright, but something in the sky felt wrong. Even the wind had stopped moving. Lyra stood outside the workshop, staring upward. Her silvery eyes glowed faintly as she scanned the horizon. Ethan walked out beside her, wiping his hands after fixing an old generator. "You look worried," he said softly. "What is it?" Lyra didn't answer at first. Her gaze stayed locked on the stars. Then she whispered, "They are close." Ethan frowned. "Who?" "My people," she said. "Andarian command." "They find me." Ethan's heart sank. "How can you tell?" Lyra raised her hand. The air shimmered faintly around her fingers, a projection of blue light forming a pattern in the air. It was a signal map, full of moving symbols Ethan couldn't read. "They send search beacons," she explained. "They look for ship energy." "My signal." Ethan glanced back at the half-repaired ship. Its faint blue glow pulsed gently like a heartbeat. "You mean that thing's calling them here?" She nodded sadly. "I try to stop it. But too late." He rubbed his face, thinking quickly. "So what happens when they find you?" Lyra looked down. "They take me back, or end me." Ethan froze. "End you?" "You mean—" She shook her head firmly, cutting him off. "They think I betray them. I left Warzone without order. In Andarian law, that is shame." Ethan clenched his fists. "That's not shame, that's survival." Lyra's voice was quiet. "They don't understand that." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The night air was cool, the stars bright and distant, but the weight in Ethan's chest grew heavier. He looked at Lyra, fragile, glowing, and yet strong, and made a choice. "Then we'll stop them," he said. Lyra blinked. "Stop them? They have ships, soldiers. You have tools and jeep." Ethan smiled a little. "You'd be surprised what I can do with tools and a reckless idea." Lyra tilted her head, confused but curious. "Reckless idea?" "Yeah," he said, picking up his wrench. "The kind that usually works right before everything explodes." For the next 2 days, Ethan worked non-stop. He barely slept, barely ate. His workshop became a storm of activity. Sparks flying, engines running, metal clanging. Lyra helped him where she could. Her knowledge of energy fields and frequencies turning his human machines into something far more powerful. They built strange devices from old car engines and alien circuits, machines that could jam signals, reflect energy, and confuse scanners. Ethan's brain worked faster than it ever had before. Lyra watched him with quiet admiration. He was human, limited by his tools, bound by gravity, yet his determination burned brighter than any star she knew. She found herself smiling more often, even in fear. On the second night, as they tested one of the devices, Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at her. "You sure this will work?" Lyra hesitated. "Maybe," he laughed. "Great. I love a plan that starts with maybe." She smiled faintly. "Reckless heart," she said softly. Ethan grinned. "You're starting to sound like me." But as the third night fell, the shadows came. Ethan was outside checking the perimeter when the ground beneath him began to tremble. The air filled with a low hum, deep, metallic, and unnatural. He looked up and froze. 3 dark shapes drifted silently across the sky, blocking the stars. They weren't planes. They moved too smoothly, too silently. Alien lights shimmered under their hulls, and pale blue, the same color as Lyra's ship. "Lyra!" he shouted, running inside. She was already standing near the door, her face pale, eyes glowing. "They are here. What do we do?" Ethan asked quickly. Lyra closed her eyes. "Hide ship. Hide energy." Ethan nodded and ran to the back of the workshop. They had built a tarp lined with reflective panels made from pieces of her ship. As he pulled it over the glowing craft, Lyra placed her hands on the ship's surface. The hum of energy faded, dimming the blue light to nothing. Outside, a deep sound echoed across the desert, like thunder but mechanical. A bright beam of light swept across the sands, scanning for life. Ethan pulled Lyra into the shadows behind a stack of metal crates. The beam passed over the workshop, pausing for a moment. Ethan held his breath. The light flickered, then moved away. After a few minutes, the sound faded. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Did we lose them?" Lyra shook her head. "No, they mark area. They come back." Ethan looked at her. "Then we need to be ready." By morning, they were building again. Ethan turned his Jeep into a mobile generator, linking it to Lyra's energy cells. They created a field of static around the workshop, invisible but strong enough to scramble scanners. As they worked, Ethan noticed how calm Lyra seemed. She was afraid, yes, but her focus never wavered. Her hands moved with grace, her voice steady when she explained what to do. "Why are they chasing you so badly?" he asked at one point. Lyra paused, her eyes distant. "Because I refuse to destroy," she said quietly. "My world fights endless war with others. I was scientist. I built machines for peace. They wanted weapons. I said no. I ran." Ethan stared at her in silence. "So you're being hunted for trying to stop a war?" She nodded. "Peace is danger to those who love control." He felt a lump in his throat. "You didn't run away, Lyra. You stood up for something right." She looked at him, eyes shining faintly. "And now you stand with me. Human heart." Strange thing, he smiled. "You're not wrong." That evening, the ships returned, and closer this time. Dust blew across the desert as bright blue lights scanned the ground again. Ethan's jammer crackled with static. "It's working," he said quietly. "They can't lock onto us." Lyra nodded, watching the scanner's movements in the sky. "They search harder. We not safe for long." Ethan looked at her ship. "Can we use it to fight back?" She shook her head. "Too damaged. But maybe. We send signal. Not to them, away from them, like a decoy?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Lyra said. "We make them chase wrong signal." Ethan grinned. "Now you're thinking like me." Together, they rerouted the ship's transmitter through the Jeep's generator. Lyra changed the frequency, sending a fake distress beacon far into the desert. Within minutes, the ships in the sky changed direction, following the false signal. Ethan whooped. "It's working." Lyra smiled. Clever human. But their victory was short-lived. The ground suddenly vibrated beneath them again. From the sky, one smaller craft broke away from the other, heading straight for them. Ethan's smile vanished. "They're not all fooled." The small ship descended fast, kicking up a storm of sand as it landed near the workshop. Its door opened and a beam of blue light scanned the area. Lyra grabbed Ethan's arm. "Go!" They ran toward the canyon behind the workshop, diving behind rocks as the beam swept past. The alien drone hovered, its sensors clicking softly. Ethan whispered. We can't outrun that thing. Lyra looked around quickly. We don't need run, we hide. And blinded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small crystal glowing faintly. This your energy flare. Very bright. Close eyes. Ethan nodded, covering his face. Lyra threw the crystal high into the air. It exploded in a burst of pure light, silent but blinding. The drone jerked, its sensors flashing wildly, then crashed into the sand with a heavy thud. When the light faded, Ethan opened his eyes and laughed. You did it! Lyra breathed heavily, her face pale. Too much power. It'd see us again soon, he helped her stand. Then let's move before it wakes up. They climbed over the rocks, heading toward a narrow ravine. The desert stretched endlessly before them, glowing gold under the rising sun. Behind them, smoke rose from the drone's wreckage. Lyra looked back one last time. They will not stop, she said softly. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. Then neither will we. By the time night returned, they were miles from the workshop. They camped near an old canyon ridge. Ethan built a small fire while Lyra sat nearby, her eyes lost in thought. You okay? He asked gently. She nodded slowly. Yes, but tired. Too much running. He smiled faintly. Welcome to life on Earth. We do a lot of running. She looked at him and laughed softly, a sound so rare and beautiful that it made his chest ache. You joke even when danger close, she said. Why? Because if I don't, Ethan said, I'll be too scared to move. Lyra watched the fire, her expression soft. Your fear makes courage stronger. That is strange, Ethan met her gaze. That's the human way. The flames danced between them, warm and bright against the cold desert wind. Above them, the stars stretched wide and endless, a reminder of how small they were, yet how powerful kindness and courage could be. For now they had escaped. But both knew the chase wasn't over. The shadows from the sky would return, and when they did, humanity's reckless heart and a star traveler's light would have to stand together once again. The desert night was alive with wind and whispering sand. Ethan and Lyra crouched behind the jagged rocks of the canyon, watching the distant glow of the Andarian fleet. Ships hovered silently, their blue lights cutting across the darkness like stars fallen to earth. The humans in the nearby town slept peacefully, unaware of the approaching threat, while Ethan's mind raced with plans, calculations, and one reckless idea after another. Lyra watched him quietly, her silver eyes reflecting his restless energy. Despite the danger, there was a calm in her gaze, a trust that she had not given lightly. You ready? She asked softly. Ethan looked at her and grinned, though tension made his face pale. Ready? I've never been more ready. She tilted her head. Your words, reckless. I worry. He laughed, the sound low and warm. Good, that means I'm taking this seriously. But if I'm not a little reckless, we'd already be toast. Together, they began to prepare the workshop's defenses. Ethan had scavenged all the engines, batteries, and metal panels he could find, transforming his little workshop into a fortress. Strange devices hummed under their hands. Energy reflectors, pulse emitters, and decoy transmitters built from the wreckage of Lyra's ship. Lyra guided him carefully. This reflect their sensors, she said, adjusting a panel so it mirrored the light. That mislead them. Ethan nodded, impressed. You've got a good eye for strategy. She smiled faintly. Years. Fighting, but not like this. As night deepened, the first wave of ships descended. Ethan and Lyra were ready. The decoy signals worked at first, drawing most of the fleet toward the wrong area. But one smaller ship broke off and approached directly. Its sensors glowed faintly, scanning the canyon. Too close, Ethan muttered. He grabbed a generator-linked pulse emitter and aimed it at the incoming drone. We can't outrun this thing. We have to fight smart. Lyra touched the ship with her hands, sending a faint pulse of energy. I help. Aim carefully. Ethan adjusted the emitter. The small ship faltered, spinning slightly before crashing into the canyon wall with a deafening thud. They barely had time to breathe before more drones arrived, faster and more determined than before. This is getting serious, Ethan said, wiping sweat from his brow. We'll have to lure them closer into the traps. Lyra hesitated. You risk yourself? Ethan's eyes gleamed. Always. Her lips parted slightly, a mixture of awe and fear. Human, reckless heart. The next few hours were a blur of action. Ethan ran across the sand, activating decoys and guiding Lyra as she used her alien energy to confuse the drones. Sparks flew, the desert shook with the hum of alien engines, and the night sky filled with flashes of blue light. Despite the chaos, there were moments of quiet brilliance. Ethan improvised, creating traps from simple materials, mirrors, wires, and batteries, that reflected the drone's energy beams back at them. Lyra, using her knowledge of advanced Andarian technology, amplified his devices, turning his clever tricks into lethal precision. By midnight, the workshop itself had become a fortress of ingenuity. The drones had lost track of the real signals, crashing one by one into false targets. Ethan and Lyra moved among the chaos like a single coordinated team, human instinct and alien knowledge blending seamlessly. At one point, a drone fired directly at them. Ethan shouted, pushing Lyra aside, and rolled behind a stack of metal crates. The blast struck the crates, scattering debris, but neither of them was hurt. Lyra's glowing hands pulsed, stabilizing, the dust and shrapnel in midair for a brief magical second. You saved me, Ethan said, breathing heavily. She shook her head. Together, we save. Hours passed like minutes. By the time the first hint of dawn colored the sky, the Andarian fleet had retreated, confused and defeated. Smoke rose from the desert where drones had crashed, leaving a quiet victory in their wake. Lyra collapsed to the sand, exhausted. Too much. For one night, she whispered. Ethan sat beside her, gently brushing sand from her silver hair. You did great, he said softly. We did great. Together. She smiled faintly, her eyes tired but bright. I never thought humans so strong. Not with weapons, but with heart. Ethan chuckled. Reckless heart, remember? Lyra laughed softly, a sound that shimmered in the morning light. Yes, reckless. As the sun rose, painting the desert gold, Ethan and Lyra looked out across the sands. Their little world had survived another night. And for the first time since she had fallen from the stars, Lyra felt something she had long forgotten. Hope. Even though the threat was far from over, she had found a human with a kind heart and a reckless courage that made her believe that together, they could face anything. The following morning was calm, almost serene after the chaos of the previous nights. The desert was quiet, the sand golden in the early sun. Ethan worked silently, repairing what little damage the drones had caused, while Lyra sat nearby, her hands tracing patterns in the sand. The tension of fear had faded, leaving a gentle bond in its place. She watched Ethan carefully, noticing the determination in his movements and the softness in his eyes when he looked at her. For a being from the stars, this human was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. Lyra began, hesitating. She had spoken little about herself in recent days, afraid her words might betray weakness. I must go soon. Ethan looked up, frowning. Go, what do you mean? My ship, repair not enough. Andarian command. Will return, she said softly. I cannot stay. Earth, beautiful, but not safe. He nodded slowly, swallowing a lump in his throat. I figured as much, he said, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Lyra's silver eyes softened. You helped me. Much more than safe, you taught me trust. Grateful. Ethan smiled faintly. You taught me too, he admitted, that even a human with a reckless heart can make a difference. For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the wind and the distant calls of desert birds. Then Ethan stood, walking over to the half-repaired ship. He examined it carefully, his hands moving over its silver panels, remembering every night of hard work and every moment of shared courage. It's ready, he said finally. Not perfect, but it will fly. You'll make it home. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes shining. Home, far, but heart, here. He smiled, feeling warmth in his chest he hadn't expected. I guess we're both a little reckless, he said. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo with the music of the stars. Yes, reckless. The ship hummed gently, its blue lights flickering with life. Ethan had attached extra stabilizers, strengthened the hull, and ensured that Lyra's energy systems were fully connected. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was enough to take her home. Before she climbed aboard, Lyra turned to Ethan. Human, kind eyes. Thank you. I will not forget. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. I won't forget you either, Star Traveler. She touched his face gently, her fingers cool and faintly glowing. You changed me. Human heart. Powerful, he smiled, swallowing hard. Come back soon, he said quietly. The stars are big, but I think there's room for you here too. Lyra's eyes glimmered with emotion. Maybe, yes. With that, she climbed into the cockpit. The ship's lights brightened, casting soft blue reflections across the desert. Ethan stepped back, shielding his eyes from the growing glow. The engines roared softly, a sound that carried both power and hope. The ship lifted slowly at first, then with grace breaking free from the desert floor. Dust swirled around Ethan's boots as he watched her rise higher and higher into the morning sky. Above, the stars twinkled faintly, as if celebrating her flight. Lyra looked down, smiling through tears, seeing the world below, and the human who had given her trust, courage, and something she had not felt in years, hope. The ship rose higher and higher, until it became a streak of silver against the vast blue, and in that moment Lyra realized something profound. Earth was not just a place to hide. It was a world that had given her kindness, courage, and the strength to continue her journey. She had come from the stars in pain, but she had found something worth protecting, a human with a reckless heart who believed in her. As the desert became smaller beneath her, she whispered softly to the wind, to the stars, to the universe itself, "Thank you." And far below, Ethan watched the sky, his heart swelling with pride and hope. The desert was quiet once again, but he knew that somewhere among the stars Lyra carried a piece of Earth with her, and he carried a piece of her in return. The human heart had met the alien heart. They had fought, they had survived, and they had changed each other forever. Even across the vastness of space, hope, courage, and kindness endured.